Good afternoon. My name is Kurt Vassil, Sales Manager at COMsolve. Thank you very much for joining today's Canadian Numbering Forecast and its impact. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for taking the time to join and learn about the Canadian number forecasting and its impacts. I do want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and you will be able to access the session on our YouTube channel. In the chat section of this webinar, if you have any questions, please use that section. We will be answering questions at the end of Ed's presentation.
About our presenter today, Edward Antecol, Ed, has years of experience in the telecommunications industry and has executive VP level experience with both AT&T Canada and Freedom Mobile Shaw. He has managed many complex technology and telecommunication projects over the years and now manages a professional team at COMsolve, where both team members and clients can benefit from his experience. The Canadian Numbering Administrator team at COMsolve reports into Ed.
Ed, please go ahead.
Thank you. So in today's seminar, I've broken it into four sections. So I'm going to start off with an introduction to the Canadian Numbering Resource Management. Then I'm going to talk about the forecasting process that we use for monitoring when we need to do code relief and take in more numbering resources, and that process is called the Numbering Resource Utilization Forecast. And then I'm going to talk about issues with forecasting, and then I'm going to talk about possible solutions. The North American Number Plan is a telephone numbering plan used by 20 countries, primarily in North America and the Caribbean, but not Mexico. The group is historically known as World Zone 1 and has a country code of 1 under the ITU-T recommendation E.164. This is an old plan. It was devised in the 1940s by AT&T. The North American Numbering Plan divides the territories of its members into numbering plan areas, which are commonly known as area codes. The telephone numbers that we use consist of a 3-digit area code, a 3-digit central office code, and a 4-digit line number. And you can see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen the structure of our numbering. The administration and assignment of numbering resources in Canada is performed by an independent third party who acts as the Canadian Number Administrator. COMsolve is the current CNA. CNA operates under a contract to the Canadian Number Administration Consortium, which represents the Canadian telecommunications industry. Regulatory oversight of number administration is provided by the CRTC. So now I want to talk about the North American Numbering Plan and where we're at in terms of resource consumption. So as you saw in the previous slide, our numbers are made up of an area code and then a CO code and then a block of line numbers. So what we first have to worry about is when do we have to expand our area codes, and how many area codes we have in service and how many area codes are left. Because when there's no more area codes left, the numbering plan needs to change, be expanded, or significantly changed. So this chart just shows the 20 countries that make up the North American Numbering Plan. And it also shows in the second column the number of NPA or area codes that each country has. So this report was generated in April 21, and it's done annually, so it's already a little bit out of date. It shows Canada as having 47 area codes assigned, and that number now is, as of yesterday, and a recent CRTC decision for area code 819 now stands at 50 area codes that have been assigned. But you can see that Canada has 47 for its population, or approximately 800,000 people per area code. Then if you look down at the US, you see that they have 351 area codes assigned for their population, or approximately 950,000 population per area code. So, so Canada is consuming area codes based on population a little bit more than our partners to the south. Most of the other countries in area code in World Zone 1 here have only a single area code, although there are some exceptions. Jamaica has 2, and Dominican Republic has 3, for example. So in terms of available area codes, it's 3 digits. So theoretically, that should give you 1,000 area codes to play with or use. But that's not the case. You can't have an area code starting with 0 or 1 for historical reasons. If your area code started with 0 and you went to make a local 10-digit call and your first digit you dialed was 0, many phone systems would think you were making an operator call with additional digits following. So what's called a 0+ call, an operator call with additional digits. So that rules out using 0. And then if you started your area code with a 1, people might think our phone systems might think you're trying to make a long distance call. So taking 0 and 1 out of the mix, that really gives you 800 area codes that are available for assignment. And we saw what was assigned on the previous slide. There's a few that have been carved out that are not available for assignment. So in addition to what you saw on the previous slide, based on this last report, there were 16 area codes reserved for Canada that are available for us to assign from the North American pool. And then there's some that are reserved for things like toll-free service, like 800 or 866. And then there's ones for special purposes. You don't want an area code 911, for example, because phone systems would get confused when you dialed 911 if you were dialing the first 3 digits of a local number or actually trying to dial 911. So we prohibit the use of an area code 911. So those other uses, and then there's some non-geographic area codes that are reserved for things like IoT that don't route to a specific exchange. And so those are called non-geographic codes, and some have been set aside there as well. So the total pool is 800. Canada, as of this report, had 16 left reserved, and that number is now down to 13 left reserved. And of the 13 left reserved, a number of them have already been tentatively earmarked to be assigned to existing area code complexes that are nearing exhaust. So this report produced an interesting projection, and that is that the North American numbering plan will exhaust in 2057. Now, that's a very long time. Why should we care? Unfortunately, though, if you look at Canada and its consumption of area codes and how many are still reserved for Canada from the initial pool that was allocated to us, we are now projecting exhaust in 2033, and that number seems to be coming down. So exhaust could actually come sooner.
Thanks, Ed. Before we move on to the next topic, please take a moment to answer the following poll question. Thank you, Ed. Please continue.
So I just want to briefly talk about, well, what happens when we exhaust. So today we have a projected exhaust in 2033, and then we won't have any more area codes to add to this map for Canada. And so what's going to happen? Well, there is a plan in place to expand the North American numbering plan, and that involves changing from 10-digit dialing, or 1 plus 10 digits, to 12-digit dialing. So that means adding another digit to the end of the area code. So and then adding another digit at the beginning of the central office code. And as you can imagine, that will be in a very, very difficult transition. Switches will need to change in terms of their routing and translations. Customers will need to reprogram their alarm systems. People will have to remember and learn to dial 12 digits instead of 10. So massive change, and we really don't want that to happen anytime soon. And hopefully we won't need telephone numbers at some point in the future, we'll move to something better, and we won't have to worry about North American number plan exhaust. So now turning to the slide here in the map of Canada. So this shows the area codes and the areas that they cover. So you can see 867 area code covers the northern part of Canada, and 204431 covers the province of Manitoba, for example. And in some places you can see there's many area codes. So I don't know if you can see Toronto on this map. It's a little tiny dot, but it has 416, 437, and 647. And as we start to run out of numbers in Toronto, we will have to have another area code. And currently there are a number of area codes where this is in the process of happening, and new area codes are being introduced. So each clump of area codes, or each grouping of area codes that covers the same area is called an NPA complex, and we manage we manage the forecasting process and the exhaust and augmentation process generally at the NPA complex level. There are 18 NPA complexes, and for each NPA, there are about 800 usable central office codes, and those are the codes that we assign to the carriers when they come asking for additional number blocks. And each CO code enables the carrier to assign up to 10,000 numbers, and those would be the 4 digits that come after the central office code. So this slide here shows where we're at with each area code complex in terms of the relief process. So for example, in 204431, we're now in relief planning, and that's because we have a projected exhaust date of April 2024. Generally, we start the relief planning when we project exhaust within the next 6 years. So we get regular forecasts from the carriers. We aggregate the individual forecasts, utilization forecasts, and then we look at when that area code is going to exhaust. And if that date is within 6 years, we put it into relief planning. And that triggers a whole other process, which I'll describe in a few minutes. Another state for an area code, as we get closer to the exhaust date, and I'll pick, for example, 249705. Well, in that area code, it's in relief planning. The projected exhaust date is April 23, and so now we already have a relief date set. So what has happened is the relief planning process is coming to a conclusion. The folks doing the relief planning have finalized which NPA to use for relief planning. They've run the plans by the commission, and the commission has issued a decision approving the new NPA to be added to the complex and approving the relief date and the plans to get there. And so therefore there is a relief date set. Looking further down the table, you see that there's 2 NPA complexes, the first one being 289365905, where relief planning has already been completed. It finished in October 2021. So at this point, it's in steady state, and not until it's ready to, not until we start to see exhaust happening within 6 years will that status change. So you can see there's a few area codes that are in a steady state, but you can see the vast majority of the complexes are in relief planning, or they're in an even worse state, which is a Jeopardy state. And a Jeopardy state exists when a relief date has been projected, yet the demand has changed, because we're constantly getting new forecasts and updated forecasts. And if those updated forecasts suggest that we're going to exhaust before the relief date, the NPA complex then goes into a Jeopardy state, and extra severe measures have to be taken to conserve the code resources until the new relief can be brought in an orderly fashion. You can't just snap your fingers and say, okay, well, we'll just add another area code tomorrow. It takes a lot of work and planning. It takes public communication to let the public know about a new area code. It takes a lot of work in the carrier switches to enable routing for this new area code, etc. So it does take time, and sometimes forecasts change, and we might run short before the relief, in which case it goes into Jeopardy state. And then there's certain area codes that you'll notice that don't have any overlays yet, and you can see what that means where there's no overlay is that the folks in those areas, they don't need to dial 10 digits when they make a local call because there's only one area code. So they're still, for the most part, on 7-digit dialing. And in order to bring in a new area code for that same area, first you have to introduce 10-digit dialing, so to get everyone used to dialing the 10 digits for a local call, and then you can add the new area code. So we have we have area code 506, which is New Brunswick, where we now have a relief planning date set and a plan to move everyone to 10-digit dialing. So we're phasing in the new area code. It just takes longer to get the relief going because of the additional complexity of 10-digit dialing. Then we have a few area codes where we don't have that problem because we're not going to exhaust for a very long time, including 807 in northwestern Ontario and 867 in Canada's far north.
Thank you, Ed. So far, great information. Please take another couple of seconds to answer this poll. All right, folks, poll has closed. Ed, please go ahead.
So on this next slide, we're trying to show the different phases or states that an area code complex can be in from a relief planning perspective. The CNA requires all code holders to file various forecasts, and then what the CNA does is these forecasts are filed in confidence, and the CNA aggregates those forecasts and then produces an overall projection as to when that NPA complex will exhaust, and it publishes those results on a regular basis. So there's different types of forecasts that the CNA will require from code holders depending on the state of the NPA complex. So the first state is the general state where an NPA complex is not forecast to exhaust within 72 months or 6 years. And when it's in that state, we generally ask the code holders once a year to send us a forecast of how many central office codes they're going to need from that NPA complex over 6 years, and then we take and aggregate that and make sure that we're not going to we don't need to go into relief planning. If the forecasting as a result of the general NRUF shows that relief will be needed within 72 months, the state of the NPA complex changes to in relief planning. And when it goes into relief planning, we ask for forecasts more frequently. The forecast may have a different format, and we publish the results. Typically, relief planning forecasting is done every 6 months. So you as a carrier will get an email from us at the beginning of every year to send your G-NRUFs, which are your general forecasts. But you'll also have a request to fill out R-NRUFs, which are relief planning NRUFs, at the same time, but only for certain area codes that are in relief planning. And we'll be asking, the CNA, I should say, typically asks for those twice a year. And then as a result of aggregating all of those forecasts, we see that we're going to run out before the relief date, or then the CNA will declare a Jeopardy condition, and will ask for a different form of forecast and with an increased frequency. And for example, the Jeopardy NRUF or J-NRUF will look for forecasting on a per quarter basis instead of on a yearly basis. The general forecast, which is called a G-NRUF, is a requirement from all CO code holders to file with the CNA, unless there's an R-NRUF or G-NRUF required for that CO code, in which case a different forecast may be required for that area code complex. In the G-NRUF, we ask the carriers to file a 6-year out forecast. So you indicate your current usage and then what you expect each year for the next 6 years. And on this next slide, we have just shown the format of a G-NRUF forecast that each code holder is required to file. You only fill out the rows for those complexes where you either have code resources or anticipating needing code resources. So if you're a CLEC and you only have 416 code resources and you don't foresee your business plan changing in the next year to go into any new areas, then you'll only file a forecast for that 416 row. And you'll file it by OCN as well. So if you're a carrier with multiple OCNs with different lines of business, if you have a wireless OCN and a fixed line OCN, you'll file separate forecasts, one for each OCN, and again, you'll populate those rows that are applicable to your business and its future needs. When an NPA is entering the time frame for relief, what we'll do is we typically publish the results of the annual G-NRUF in the spring, and if an NPA complex goes into relief planning, we will then, usually in July, send out the requests the July after we've declared that the NPA has gone into relief planning. We'll send out requests for the carriers to fill out R-NRUFs, and we'll keep asking for those NRUFs typically every 6 months until relief is implemented or until we go into a Jeopardy condition. So that's the first thing that happens is we put the NPA complex into relief planning. We tell the industry that it's in relief planning by publishing the results of the G-NRUF, and then the following July we start asking for R-NRUFs, R-NRUF forecasts. We also notify the CRTC that an NPA complex is in a relief planning window, and we ask that they issue a public notice of consultation. So the CRTC will look at the data, and then they will issue a notice of consultation telling the public and all carriers again that relief planning is to commence for a particular NPA complex. And it's this public notice of consultation that begins the relief planning process in earnest. It establishes an ad hoc relief planning committee, or RPC, for the area code complex. This relief planning committee meets regularly and continues to monitor the incoming G-NRUFs and develops the various plans that are needed to introduce the new area code. And these plans include a relief implementation schedule, a consumer awareness program, and a network implementation plan, so that all carriers can be ready for the new area code. A relief date is included in the plans, and it's typically 12 to 18 months in advance of a possible exhaust date. However, where you only have 7-digit dialing, the relief date is often set so that there's more of a buffer before the possible exhaust date. Once the relief planning committee is prepared all its various reports, these reports get filed with a group called CISC, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and then they eventually get filed with the CRTC, which must approve the plans, the relief date, and the new NPA that has been selected for that area code complex. And so people might wonder, well, how do you choose what the new NPA is? Well, we have an inventory of 16 NPAs that are possible. And so what the planning committees do is they look at the borders of the NPA, look at where the local calling areas spill over into neighboring NPAs, look and see if CO codes have been assigned that match the NPA, and look at a number of other factors, and then they come up with the new NPA from the available inventory that will cause the least amount of problems for the introduction. They recommend that new NPA to the CRTC, and then the CRTC will issue a decision, and there was a decision issued just the other day for area code 819 in Western Quebec, approving the planning and the new area code for 819. So that's the way the process works. Now, as we move along that process, we might have picked a relief date, but we're still getting forecasts coming in every 6 months, and during that time, things can change. And if something changes so that we think we're going to run out of numbers before the exhaust date, projected exhaust date, or the relief date, we then have to take some extraordinary measures to conserve the available CO codes so that the remaining ones can be given out fairly and equitably before the relief happens. So we will, if we see that happening, we will declare a Jeopardy condition for that area code complex. And then when we do that, notice is sent to all the carriers, all the code holders. The code holders have a responsibility to review the status of all the CO codes assigned. They then have to produce a G-NRUF worksheet for the CNA within 30 days, which is a new forecast, and it has more fine increments. So you'd be forecasting typically on a quarterly basis your projected additional demand, and those will be assessed continuously. And during that time, there will be special measures in place to distribute the remaining available resources. Okay, the G-NRUF process typically requires forecasts, as I said before, at a quarterly level and at an exchange area level of detail up until the relief date. So as we saw in the G-NRUFs, we're forecasting at the NPA complex level. Depending on the conditions, in fact, you may have to provide a lot more detail on your G-NRUF forms. The other thing to note, the rules change for assignments based on a Jeopardy condition plan. There is a predefined Jeopardy condition plan, a default plan, and then the RPC committees can change that plan and impose additional conditions or recommend relaxation of certain conditions. But typically, your Jeopardy condition plan would involve shorter aging intervals by carriers in terms of recycling of numbers. Perhaps it would, well, the other thing is faster in-service intervals for new codes. It may require, or it does require, I should say, CRTC staff approval for all CO code assignments during the Jeopardy condition. And there is a risk that you as a carrier won't get the resources you need if your Jeopardy condition is, if your forecast is such that your demand is greater than what you previously forecast. In other words, if you have unexpected demand, there's a risk that you won't get your numbering resources. There are 2 NPAs in relief in Jeopardy condition right now, Alberta 403 and NPA 819 in Quebec. And you'll see, I just noticed in my email that all carriers received a notification that NPA 819 was coming out of Jeopardy condition. Although there will still be some restrictions on resource allocation during that time.
Folks, please take a few seconds to answer this poll. Poll's closed, and go ahead.
Okay, so in this section of the webinar, I'd like to talk about issues with forecasting. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there's a potential exhaust of Canadian telephone numbers sometime in the next 10 to 12 years. But in the forecasting process, there is a penalty you pay if an area code complex goes into jeopardy and you've previously under forecasted your demand. Because if you've under forecasted your demand and you suddenly need resources in a jeopardy condition, you may not get them. The CRTC staff can deny your application because of the unexpected forecast in demand. However, there are no incentives for there are no penalties for over forecasting. So if you're a carrier, you sometimes may take the position, unfortunately, that I'm better to over forecast than under forecast because the consequences for over forecasting aren't that severe. But I do want to point out that that's not a very good way to behave, because what happens when you over forecast, you push NPAs into relief planning prematurely, and you also cause NPAs to go into jeopardy condition early, and you cause false alarms. And when these alarms go off, you're compelled to participate in relief planning committees. You're compelled to develop customer awareness and network plans to transition, only to find out in later forecasts that, well, you know what, the relief date is now pushed out further, and I don't need this work for another year or 2 years or 3 years. And so while you may be protecting yourself by over forecasting, you're creating more work for yourself and the entire industry by causing these false alarms. So you're hurting yourself and everybody else when you intentionally over forecast. So I just beware. So that's one of the issues with forecasting. So what are the solutions to delay the exhaust of numbering resources? Well, one of the other things I should mention is that every time, in addition to the annual forecasting for G-NRUFs and the semi-annual forecasting, you also need to provide a forecast and justification every time you require a new CO code resource. So you need to provide the history of how many numbers you've assigned in the previous 6 months, and you need to show that you're going to exhaust in the next 12 months, and therefore you need a new CO code. And if you're in a jeopardy condition, you need to show you're going to exhaust in the next 4 months. So but there's a hole there, and that is that if you are one of those service providers who sells or rents telephone numbers to wholesale customers, so you're a carrier and you get a block of 10,000 numbers, and you give 8,000 of them off to a wholesale provider, or be it a car manufacturer who wants to put numbers assign telephone numbers to their cars, or you want to give them to a voice over IP provider who's not eligible to get their own CO codes, then when you do your forecasts and declare the number of phone numbers that you have assigned, if you gave them to your wholesale customer, you're going to say, well, they're all assigned. I've given them to a customer. But in fact, there is no accounting for that customer's uses of those numbers. And if those customers are underutilizing those numbers, that's a problem. In fact, we're not really running out of numbers because your wholesale customers have large inventories of telephone numbers, which they really ought not to have if they're unused and likely to be unused for long periods of time. Another solution to delay exhaust, and the industry doesn't like this because it's going to be very expensive, is to go to assignment of 1,000 block pools of numbers instead of 10,000 blocks. So today we give out a CO code, and the carrier can use, give out all 10,000 numbers to their individual customers. But if we gave them out in 1,000 block increments, and they've been doing this in the US for some time, then we might not run out as fast. And one typical example that I've seen in the past is a new CLEC who decided to launch, and they had a very ambitious business plan. They were going to launch service in 50 exchanges. So they asked for 50 CO codes, and I'm making up the number 50. It was probably more than that. And so each one of them needed a block of 10,000 numbers, because the current rules are that for every local interconnection region you want to launch service in, you have to have a block of numbers. So in that circumstance, it would have been better to give them 1,000 blocks for each area they wanted to go in instead of 10,000. So clearly more efficient if you give out smaller blocks. But there are penalties and costs to that, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. So one of the solutions is to move to 1,000 blocks. The next thing to do is to look at over forecasting and see if we can create better incentives to deter over forecasting. And the last thing we can do to delay exhaust is to have better number utilization planning tools that are used by the carriers to better keep track of and manage those resources.
All right, poll number 4. Thank you, Ed. Folks, you know the drill at this point. Thanks for your participation so far. This is the last poll question. Please take a moment to answer. Thank you. The poll is now closed. Ed, please continue.
Okay, so in this next slide, and this is just a representative tool for number management. It's a tool by a company called 10X. There are other tools out there, and a lot of carriers have developed their own tools as well. So, but I chose this tool as an example of what a numbering management tool ought to do for you as a carrier. So there are really 4 functions that you need to think about from a number inventory management. So you need the ability to do real-time assignment of telephone numbers for your customers. So you need the ability either online or at your retail store to go into your inventory and grab an appropriate block of numbers, say 10 numbers for a customer to choose one. You need to lock that block while the customer is choosing, so it's not chosen by 2 customers at the same time in different locations. And you have to choose the right block of numbers that are appropriate to the local exchange where the customer wants service. So you need that capability. You need the ability to deal with local number portability, so that you can, if a customer comes to you with a phone number, you can bring it into your inventory management system and provision that customer and arrange to get that number ported over to you. And when the customer terminates service, you also need the ability to take that phone number and return it to the inventory of the carrier that originally was assigned the number. So you need to be able to manage that process. You also need to be able to do utilization forecasting pretty much on demand. You've got your annual forecasting, you've got your semi-annual forecasting for some exchanges, you've got your Jeopardy forecasting that may be called upon, and in fact, every time you also need to know in advance that you need new numbers, and it can take at least 66 days to turn up to get a new CO code and get it provisioned and the industry notified of the new CO code going into service in a particular exchange area. So you need to know in advance when you're running out, and you need to generate a forecast in order to get your numbering resource. And lastly, you need an auditing function to make sure you're not losing numbers, that they're not getting dropped off the system, and you're losing numbers when customers disconnect. You're not making them available subsequently for reassignment. So this is just a quick block diagram that shows some of the different components that an inventory system would need to interface with. It would need to interface to porting systems. It would need to interface to your business support systems so that you can assign numbers to customers. It would need to interface to your network, so your network can turn up your new CO code resources and provision translations and routing. So just show some of those important functions. And then on this last slide here, this is a simplification of a very complex process. I'd encourage you to go on the CRTC website under CISC and look at the workflows, but there are complicated flows for number management. You assign a number from your inventory to your customer. Your customer, throughout its life cycle, eventually will discontinue the service. You need to put the number back in a pool, let it age for a while so you don't reassign it immediately to another customer who starts getting the old customer's phone calls. When it comes out of aging, you then make it available for reassignment. At the same time, you've got customers porting out with your numbers, and that number will come back when the customer finally discontinues service with their new service provider, and then it will snap back. So this is a simplification of some very complicated processes that you need to manage, and if you don't audit it and make sure it's working, you risk losing numbers. And finally, in this last slide here, this is just a sample of a report that you need your system to generate. This slide here shows a US report, and you can see the reporting of 1,000 blocks because they're using 1,000 block assignments in the US. Here we're using reporting at the 1,000 block or 10,000 block level. So, but you need to be able to generate these reports nearly on demand. And that's it for my presentation. I think we'll now go to Q&A.
Ed, thank you very much for this fantastic webinar and all the information. I just want to say before we go on to any Q&A, if you need any additional information, please feel free to contact me at kirk.vasios@COMsolveinc.com, and we can help your organization with any of the information that you need additionally answered. Ed, we've got about 12 questions in the hopper here right now. We've got about 10 minutes to go. So I'm going to pick here at random some of them that I think were good, but I'll start with the number one here. My network team doesn't like block assignments. They want a full NXX every time. How can I tell them differently? Is this a network issue or not?
Your team is going to have to spend a lot of money to be able to implement 1,000 block assignments versus 10,000 block assignments, and they're going to have to do it more often. But I think you have to remind them that they have a responsibility to help with the conservation and maximization of the utilization of Canadian numbering resources. And the cost of implementing 1,000 block pools are likely to be far less than the cost of moving to 12-digit dialing, which would be an enormous, I think would be an enormous cost. So one of the things you can tell your team is, better to think about 1,000 block assignments than the alternative, which is running out early and having a much bigger problem. And the other thing your team can do is, depending on the volume of how fast your company goes through number blocks, there's nothing stopping your company, even in a 1,000 block environment, from requesting 10 blocks at once if your forecasts and your actual past assignment practices can justify it. And even today, we have carriers that are requesting 2 or 3 blocks at a time of 10,000 because in the space of a year, they will definitely go through that many blocks or more. So yes, it's a lot of work to have to do the same thing 10 times instead of 1 time, but you can minimize some of the work by getting larger, making requests for more blocks at the same time. And then the other thing you can do to minimize the problems with going to 1,000 blocks is, as you know, with each new block you implement, you have to go into your switch and enable the routing for that block. So what you can do is you can automate that process. There is something called a local exchange routing guide, which publishes all new CO code assignments in advance and 1,000 block assignments well in advance of their effective date. And so you can buy that subscription and you can create systems that grab those files and manipulate them and pre-program the translations in your switch so that today you might have the effort of implementing 1,000 block and changing your translations. If you have to do the same thing 10 times because you're getting blocks of 1,000 each, well, then you might want to think about automation. And hopefully that can help your team get over this idea of 10,000 blocks.
Thanks,
sorry,
Ed.
1,000 block pools, sorry.
Well, thanks, Ed. That's great. I'm going to pick one here as well. We've got about a couple more minutes, so I'm going to pick one that, can we be denied access to numbers?
Yes, for several reasons. Okay, failure to file or pay fees for the operation of the CNA. Those fees are levied by CNAC. and you as a carrier will file annual reports of your revenues, and fees are based on revenues, and all code holders today contribute to member resource management. So if you're in default of your payment or filing obligations, then yes, you can be denied numbers. You can also be denied if you're ineligible to receive the resource. In other words, you're not a LEC or a proposed CLEC or a wireless carrier. So if you're a type of service provider who's not entitled to numbers, then you're not going to get them. And you can also be denied numbers in a Jeopardy condition. As I mentioned before, if your projected exhaust is greater than 4 months, you're not going to get that new resource. And secondly, if your forecasts in your G-NRUFs are, if you've under forecasted, you have unexpected demand, well, that might be a reason for CRC staff to deny your numbering application.
Thank you very much, Ed. Fortunately, we have run out of time. There are actually over a dozen questions still left, but rest assured, we see your questions and we'll get back to you with Ed's responses. Thank you, Ed, for taking the time to inform us about the Canadian number forecasting and its impact. And thank you to everyone who sent us some questions. Please connect with us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, and you will be able to find this webinar on our YouTube channel. Thank you again to all the attendees for taking the time and engaging with today's content. Have a great afternoon.